Haul the roll and go. Where am I to go? Meet Johnny, where am I to go? For I'm a young and a sailor lad, and where am I to go?
Welcome to Where Am I to Go podcast. Today we're in a museum that I am fairly familiar with. We are in Thermopolis, Wyoming. We are with Jackie Dorothy, who also has a podcast on Hot Springs County and some of the things that were going on here. And it's an extremely good podcast. It's called Pioneers of
Outlaw Country.
Outlaw Country. There we go. I knew it wasn't Hot Springs County, and the reason it's called Outlaw Country is because Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and many other outlaws were in this vicinity. And as far as I understand, they were pretty well treated and taken care of here.
They were hardworking cowboys. They worked hard, played hard, and robbed hard.
Exactly.
They did everything to the extreme, and they had fun.
And they weren't really hated in this country. They helped people out, and people respected them for some reason.
They actually had the persona of being the Robin Hoods of Wyoming. So one of their creeds was that they would never rob from a working man. They only robbed from the rich, the tax collectors, and trains and banks. But they would not go in, and if they found a sheep herder that had his money for the summer, they wouldn't rob him. But if you had a doctor that looked like he was a young rich man, they might rob from that guy.
And then they did share it.
They did share it. They would go out, and there's one story that's one of my favorite of Butch Cassidy, where he was visiting this widow and she was upset, and he asked her why she was upset. She said, the tax collector's coming and he's going to foreclose on my home because I can't afford the $70 that I owe him. So he said, well, here's the 70, and he gave her some gold coins, and she was ecstatic. The tax collector showed up the next day, and he was very disappointed when she was able to pay off her mortgage. And as he was leaving her house, he got robbed. Go figure.
For 70 gold coins.
Yes. And those are the kinds of stories that we've been digging up and discovering as we go along. The reason my podcast is called Pioneers of Outlaw Country is this was a wild area. The whole state of Wyoming could be called Outlaw Country, but especially here at Hot Springs County, because this became their headquarters. What happened to a lot of these young men? Because you got to remember, the hole in the wall gang was about 100 loosely put together guys, and they'd come together, do a job, and then they would disperse and go back to their jobs as cowboys. And so they were good horsemen, they were young, and they were all hard workers. Wow.
That's some history I didn't know, but we're going to find out even more about them. Yes. This museum, just to kind of jump back to the introduction, is a really well put together county museum. It's right on the main street of Thermopolis, which has the world's largest mineral hot springs. We've done a couple of other podcasts from this town. We did Merlin's Hideout, and we also did the Dinosaur Museum, which is world class. This town is a lot of fun. They do cater to tourists because it's built kind of on that premise with the hot springs and the Bighorn River coming through it with fishing and guiding and all of those kind of things. Lots of outdoor activities, and it's a really cool little town, but it hasn't turned into Jackson Hole at all. It has a lot of the same kind of feeling, but not the overpowering you're not welcome feeling that you get at Jackson Hole because my pockets aren't full of green.
Well, we definitely welcome everybody to come to our town. It was founded at the very beginning to be a tourist town. I actually found out that one of the ranches out in the middle of nowhere, the family bought it specifically to build a hotel on it.
Oh, really?
And when that didn't come through, she built a post office, and they built a ranch. And that was the Short family, and they were out there by Anchor Dam, right in the middle of nowhere.
And Anchor Dam is really interesting story too.
That's another story in itself. Absolutely.
If you want to see a really nice reservoir in the middle of summer or toward the end of summer, go to Anchor Dam.
Otherwise, it's sinking down into the sinkhole and we're losing all the water.
It's a dam that they built. They were told by everybody that lived on Owl Creek, don't build the dam there. They
Yep.
built the dam anyway, and they've never been able to keep it full.
That's when you need to listen to the old timers and those that have been on the land for so many years.
Exactly.
These engineers, they think they know everything, and it's like,
Well, that one was a big failure.
It really was.
There's times of the year you don't have to wonder what the bottom of that reservoir looks like. So anyway, we are here at this museum. It covers a lot of different communities. There's a ghost town north of here called Jibo. There was another one that's been demolished called Crosby. They were both coal mining towns. You've got Kirby across the highway, which now has Wyoming Whiskey Distillery there. They have some great tours. There's just so much to do in this area. And I really love your podcast from the standpoint of listening to it. You take actual quotes or newspaper clippings or whatever, and you incorporate it in a really unique way to where it's almost first person, but you know it's not. And I really have enjoyed listening to all of your podcasts. In the last week, I've managed to listen to what? You've got 10 of them out or something?
20, actually.
20, okay.
Yes.
I've listened a lot more than what I thought I did.
It goes by fast. One of the things when you're talking about the newspapers is I do tend to go down rabbit holes. And if you're a person that is looking for those first-person accounts, I definitely recommend the Wyoming Newspaper Project. Google it, and you will be you'll go down a lot of stories and discover a lot of our history that you wouldn't have otherwise known.
Wow. So were you raised in Hot Springs County?
Back and forth. My dad is seventh generation Wyoming. My mom is Alaskan. So
Okay.
I have a very eclectic background when it comes to that. But I've been in the state since 2003 steadily.
Okay. Wow. Well, let's take a look at your museum.
All right. Yes. let's
Since
start
that's
this
what we're here for. And to begin with, as you first walk in, they've got a very nice little gift shop. They've got their counter here at the front. Prices to get in are really reasonable for everything that you get to see. It's what, $8 for adults?
Yep, unless you're a senior or a veteran on active duty, then we do offer discounts. And then even when you walk in, you will really start to feel the history immediately, because the desk that we stand at was actually from the Carnegie Library here in the Thermopolis.
Okay.
And we're still one of the towns that have our Carnegie Library. It's actually used by the University of Wyoming for their extension office for 4-H. And
the building itself.
The
Yes.
building itself
Yes.
still exists because that's a big controversy in the state right now.
No, it's right behind the high school.
Stained glass as well.
Yes, when you're looking at the stained glass, we've been trying to track it down to know exactly where it came from. It was definitely downtown Thermopolis, but was it from a saloon, a hardware store? We're not sure yet, but we're still doing the research. And part of that research is just getting old pictures as they come in and seeing if we can identify that same design.
Okay.
And behind you, if you see, there is a slot machine that does work. You could put a quarter in it, and people have been trying their luck with it. And this slot machine has a fun story. So it was from the dam bar, which is right down by the tunnels as you come through the Wind River Canyon. And the dam bar did burn down in the 60s. But before, what it was is that during Prohibition, a lot of these saloons still served liquor, but they would keep an eye out. And gambling was also illegal. So what Barney Smith, the owner, would do is that when he knew the heat was getting hot on him from Fremont County sheriffs, he would move the whole operations across county lines and be in Hot Springs County. Now, when we're doing our digging and we're discovering more and more things about the dam bar, some of the people that went to the dam bar might have been our own law enforcement. So that might have protected them during those years when they were considered illegal.
Actually, we've done several podcasts at different places, Hot Springs, Arkansas being one of them, and the houses of ill repute, the houses of ill repute actually catered to a lot of the police. They weren't always the most upstanding citizens, but they got away with it.
And you're going to find that over and over. That's a very common theme, especially here in Hot Springs County, is a lot of the lawmen were actually the outlaws.
Right.
And the outlaws were usually people that got on a bad side of the so-called lawmen.
Right. Yeah. For who knows what reasons besides actual crime. Right.
One of my favorite stories recently was Jim McLeod. He's an outlaw here in Thermopolis, in that area. And I've always heard that, oh, he's just this bad outlaw. And in reality, what happened is that he was a homesteader who lost his homestead, that this Ed McLaughlin and others lawfully took his home, put the money in the bank in a safe. Well, he went to rob the safe, and that's when he became an outlaw, to take back his own money.
Right.
So you have stories like that, and when you really start digging in, you discover what their connection is. It's how do I word it? It's fascinating, and there you go, another rabbit hole.
I know when I first moved to Thermopolis, I lived here for about 3 years before moving north to Basin, but when I first moved here in the early 90s, they still had, or their rumor was that in one of the buildings just over here on Arapahoe, the main drag, there was still a gambling, prostitution setup kind of going on in the back scene of whatever, which is kind of interesting too.
I wouldn't know personally, but
I mean, neither. But I know that there were plenty of people saying, I can't even remember what the guy's name was, but saying that he was running a gambling deal out of there when gambling was illegal in Wyoming, lotteries and whatever else. But
well, I definitely, the gambling I do know about that continues. So as we walk through the museum, one of the rooms that people love is to come into what we call the Pioneer Room. And this just features the different people that helped to make Thermopolis and Hot Springs County what it was. You brought up Jibo. We also had the sheep ranches. We had a lot of homesteaders out there. We had the Shorts that I was talking about that built a hotel with hopes that they would expand and this would be a tourist destination. And that was in the 1870s that they built their hotel and they bought that property. They did, eventually we have had dude ranches. Tim McCoy, the actor, had built one and had brought people in. But one of the things that I always found fascinating is the different ethnic groups that came here. We had every country represented that you can imagine, from France to Scotland. So we're standing in front of one of the displays that I love, which is right from Scotland. And they talked about how the pipers would go out there because you had the McKinseys and you had George McKinsey was one of them. He was the leader of the local band and he played bagpipes.
Okay.
And there are stories. In fact, I talked to one of our old timers here, and he said he remembered as a kid that hearing the bagpipes when they were out at Roundup.
Really?
So you don't think about those kinds of things. When you think of Roundup, you think of those movies where they're just sitting around the campfire, but you had the thing to know about it is you had people from Canada. We had a French Canadian that they talked about, he had a heavy French accent. You had people that like the Scottish brogue, and you had the Irishman. Tom O'Day was a very popular outlaw and cowboy man, and he was a very good horseman is what he was mostly known for. Just goofy, but he had a heavy Irish brogue. So the culture that they brought with them, they continued a lot of their traditions and they brought it over. Even the making of moonshine and what they called the red dago, which was wine, homemade wine, and home brew, which was the homemade beer. So all of these traditions came with them from the old country. One of my favorite little strange stories is actually about this spinning wheel that most people even just pass by. You have this spinning wheel, you look at it and you're like, oh, that's pretty cool. But then you walk over here and you read the story about it and it's confusing. It's like, why was this? So go ahead and read what it says.
The spinning wheel came from Sweden. It was taken apart and hidden in suitcases and smuggled into the United States about 1850. The donors are Martin and Dora McGrath, Bessie, Catherine, and May Gillies, Russell family, Leonard and Nellie McCollum. And it's a spinning wheel. It's a cool looking spinning wheel. It's kind of blue, antiqued. But why did they smuggle it in a suitcase?
Exactly. You fell into the story that I have been trying to figure out. Why in the world did they have to smuggle a spinning wheel? Was it taxes? Was it this patent? Were they fleeing from something? There's a story there, and all we know is that one little word that they hid it in the suitcases. So was it, and then you start to conjure up what kind of suitcases in those days in 1850. Was it a trunk with a hidden bottom? And these are the little stories that we kind of stumble upon, and it really makes you think. And then you start going down these rabbit holes and discovering so much, and it's all based on this one little sentence that it was smuggled.
You have to wonder if maybe that was just a family history story that was brought up, because I mean, you might think, oh, the wool in Sweden had some sort of virus or something in it at the time. I don't know, but they weren't really following that stuff back in 1850 to that degree. So that's just a really, like you said, rabbit hole, interesting story. Yes, Linda.
I have a question about the clan target there. Does anybody know what clan that belongs to?
No. And those are the stories that we get people that are interested in it. They'll come in and they'll have one little question and it'll get us going. It's like, well, who was it? Why? I mean, a lot of whys and a lot of whos, but that's why I end up going back to first person accounts. And then you stumble across an answer to a question you may have had a few months back. Another one is you look at this saddle and how beautifully it's tooled. And this saddle, when I was reading about it, it was like, okay, how in the world did the owner of the LU Ranch receive someone's prize saddle? Because you look at the story, I mean, it's written right there.
Bareback bucking contest championship of Montana, Miles City Roundup, and that looks like July 2nd, 3rd, and 4th of 14, and that wasn't 2014.
No, this is 1914, and it was it's a gorgeous saddle. You look at the details, you look at the tooling and the silver work, and what was really cool is I posted this on our Facebook page, and then people started doing their own research and actually came back with a picture of the young cowboy who had won this saddle originally.
Really?
Yes. Wow. We found not one but two pictures, and we even had gone to the museum. And that's where it's kind of gets funny when you're doing research. Sometimes you don't think of the obvious. Google the name.
Right.
And we didn't do that, but we went to the museum. We were going to the newspapers. We're trying to figure out who is this Rufus that owned this saddle. And the people that responded, and that's what's been fun too, and that's why I like history, is you get this community going of all ages. I mean, we've had young kids coming in doing research to people in their 90s.
Wow. And the interaction between the older teaching the younger is so valuable.
It is.
And then you've got a display of natives.
This is celebrating Wedding of the Waters. Because Thermopolis was actually bought from the Arapaho and Shoshone tribes for, I believe the cash amount was $60,000, but the Arapaho negotiated for more than just cash. They also got farming equipment, cattle, and other things. And what they said is that people are already coming and they're already using the hot springs. We can't keep them out because they were clear at Fort Washakie, which is 70 miles away.
Right.
And at Fort Washakie, they had their own hot springs. So they had a hot springs, and there is a hot springs there. And I swam at it as a kid and brought my little brother and sister there. I believe it's no longer in use, but there is talk about revitalizing it.
Oh, wow.
But the thing to know is that they did have their hot springs. So Chief Washakie and Chief Sharpnose negotiated to be able to, I believe that was the other, make sure I get the right chiefs. But they negotiated to sell the hot springs, and so then they started doing
Sharp nose.
Okay, I got it right. Yay! They got the first gift of so they do the first gift of the Waters pageant every year in August in the state park, and we have always had participation from the Shoshone tribe with that.
Okay. Now a couple of other interesting little facts here.
Okay.
the hot springs, when they were traded off or sold by
They were sold.
the natives, there was a part in the contract that said
Yes.
that water has to remain free. Some portion of the water has to remain free for the public use. So the state park here in Hot Springs County has state pools, and I don't know what the hours are, but they are free to go in and
Bathhouse, usually open
Right.
8 to 4.
8 to 4.
You
Okay.
get to go soak for 20 minutes in the hot water for free. And they're very proud of the fact that it is one of the few treaties with the tribes that has never been broken.
But they've tried.
I will say that those that are in charge of the state parks now have clearly stated that this is a gift that will continue. And it's from Chief Washiki putting that in the contract that we'll sell this as long as it remains free.
And another part of that too is in order to get to the free water, you have to have free entrance. And they were trying to put an entrance fee on the state park here probably 8 years ago or something,
Yes,
and they
and I'm
weren't.
not
There
even-
was a big controversy over whether or not they could put an entrance fee because that meant that the water wasn't free for use.
And that might have been new people coming into the state that were saying that, because I know that the ones that defended it and said absolutely not were those superintendents and state park officials that had been in Wyoming for a few years.
And that's good.
And as soon as they danced out the treaty, that talk went away.
Uh-huh.
And that's where history and knowledge of history is so important. If they didn't know that this was written into the treaty, that this is what the government agreed to, they might have been started charging.
And another point I want to make is you used a really odd phrase, wetting of the waters. And people probably don't understand
right.
how you
This
make
is
water any wetter than what it is, but it's wetting, WEDDING. And the reason it's called that is the Wind River comes out of the Wind River Range, comes down through Lander and Riverton, and then flows north through the canyon out here. And what's the canyon called?
Wind River.
Wind River Canyon. Geez, Loren, have a brain fart here. It comes through the Wind River Canyon, which has a road that goes through it that's an absolutely gorgeous drive. Sometimes you can see bighorn sheep and deer or whatever, and it's a beautiful drive along the river. But the Wind River, when it gets out of Wind River Canyon, turns into the Bighorn River as it goes through, just continues north through Bighorn Basin and dumps into the Missouri. But the wetting of the waters is where the name changes. So you can be on the Wind River and float across and end up on the Bighorn River.
Midstream.
Midstream.
Only place in the world. I came across.
Is it the only place in the world that this happens?
I have not found any other record of any other river that changes name in midstream. Usually you have it coming out, it's forking, it's doing something. And what's really interesting is I went down some more rabbit holes. In the 1870s, you had General Sheridan saying, we need to make a spot where this river changes its name. And he wanted it to change its name at the Little Wind down in Riverton in Fort Washakie area.
Okay.
In Fremont County, he thought it should change. But people continued to call it the Wind River up until it got into the canyon. And then as it flowed out of the canyon is when it was the Bighorn. And it was actually the Thermopolis Chamber of Commerce that finally made the decision by placing a sign at the spot and saying, this is the spot. And it wasn't, I believe it was decided in like the 40s or 50s.
Really?
Until that time, it kept going back and forth. Even our canyon at one time, people called it the Bighorn Canyon instead of the Wind River Canyon.
Okay.
It just depended. So that's where we get confused when we're doing research. And it's like, well, this Bighorn Canyon, it's outside of Powell. And it's like, no, they're referring to this canyon. It was also known as the Mystic Canyon and had all these different names, the Canyon of the Chiefs.
Oh, really?
So the canyon itself has a rich history. And before we go on, I do want to say that this is a 100th anniversary of the Wind River Canyon Scenic Byway.
Oh, really?
It was built and finished in 1924. And so from the tunnels all the way to the mouth of the canyon, that road is now 100 years old as of this year.
And it's during the winter. It is a treacherous little road. It seems like
But
there's
isn't
accidents.
any in Wyoming?
That's pretty much true. But
I mean,
for some
try
reason,
going from Casper to Shoshone, what are you going to
right,
find?
right, yes,
But it is definitely very scenic and worth the drive.
definitely worth the drive. Then we come into the next gallery, and you have, it looks like different school memorabilia from
Celebrating
Jibo
our
and
basketball, because basketball was such a big thing here. The moment it was introduced as a sport, Wyoming and Jibo played basketball. And you mentioned Jibo before. It was the coal mining town, and at one point it was bigger than Thermopolis with over 2,500 people. And Crosby and Kirby were the three coal towns, and they were just had their own. When you think about coal towns, a lot of times you're thinking about the fighting. Yes, that happened. I found a great quote just recently where this guy said, "We would have great parties and great fights, and there was no sheriff, so we were allowed to fight as we wanted." But not only were the coal miners fighting, but they were also playing in bands. And when you look at the bands that they had, the Jibo Miners Band in 1923 was one of the most famous bands in Wyoming.
really,
They traveled all over the state because you think about summer months, coal demand is down. So these miners would travel around. And if you look at the pictures, they were very proud of their uniforms. They took great care of their instruments. And Bob Ray was the director. He was also the owner of this company store in
okay,
Jibo. And so his history is rich and important to Jibo. But the fact that we had a band, we also had a baseball team that was well known throughout the state. And we had boxing. We had the 4th of July. Everybody came, no, actually 4th of July, they came to Thermopolis Labor Day, because if you recall, Labor Day was huge for the coal miners because that suddenly meant that they had regular hours. They no longer worked 16 to 20-hour shifts, but had set times, and that's when they celebrate Labor Day.
okay,
And Labor Day was the biggest holiday. It even surpassed Christmas and New
Wow.
Year's at Jibo. And people would come from all around. I've talked to people, even my mother-in-law, and she was like, strawberry soda. That's what I remember from Labor Day.
That
It was
is
just
so
a huge
interesting.
party.
Because you go to Jibo now, and they've got 5 houses sitting up on a hill that were made of block.
Yes.
They're in sad state of disrepair. But
There's
when
actually
when
more
Jibo,
than 5.
is there more than 5?
Yes.
Okay, I know there's a couple of foundations and
Yeah.
stuff, but anyway, what, in the 50s or 60s they bulldozed Crosby completely.
Not until the 70s.
The
and it
70s?
was Jibo that they did that too.
Okay, what did
So
they do to
BLM
Crosby? Crosby, there's still some sidewalks
There
and
might
stuff
be.
out
I'm
there,
not
but
as familiar as Crosby. I just started studying that actually yesterday.
oh, okay.
But Jibo itself, the BLM went in. Most of the company houses were taken out of Jibo and brought into town. And it's like we would drive around, and Dean and Mary would point out how homes that were from Jibo or Grass Creek, because the same thing happened at the oil field, the company town. In the 60s, they said no more company towns. The homes were moved in.
Okay.
People were able to buy the homes.
And I had a house that was a Jibo house. It was moved in 1939, and when we were
There you go.
remodeling it, we found all kinds of stuff in the walls from 1917. So they had it stuck up above the windowsills
Oh,
and
wow.
all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it
We've
was
had
pretty
people
interesting.
bring some of that stuff in. They found movie tickets because there was a movie theater at Jibo. There was tennis courts and swimming pools.
Wow.
I mean, when you think of a coal camp, I don't know about you, but I'm imagining tents. What they actually had it was a full town with everything you can imagine.
Including a cemetery.
Yes.
It's a cool little cemetery. If you get out to
Oh.
Jibo, make sure and take the trip to the cemetery.
And it is definitely haunted, and it has some stories attached to it that I find are heartbreaking. So what happened with the cemetery is when they closed down Jibo, they moved the bodies of the adults to Thermopolis. They exhumed
really?
them, moved them in, and what was left, and so it's kind of nicknamed the Children's Cemetery.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
then-
because there's a little crib there and,
Yeah.
and some other things.
And
Yes.
if you look at the dates, a lot of them are just young, and if you notice, a lot of them are from 1918.
From the yeah.
Diphtheria. And the sad story that it was just one that Ray Schaefer, a local historian, stumbled into, because he was talking to this guy. This guy showed up every year until 2010. He showed up and he would go to the cemetery and put flowers on this boy's and girl's grave. He explained the story is that diphtheria outbreak had happened. They had vaccines, but they only had vaccines for one child per house.
Really?
Yes, they were that limited. The nurse and the doctor showed up at his family home. He was 5 years old, and he remembers them asking, which child do you want us to vaccinate? And his parents looked at him and said, we'll vaccinate him because he's the oldest and he'll carry on the name. His brother and sister both died of diphtheria.
Wow. Wow. And then as we come in to this next area, you've got an old Yellowstone, I'm assuming this is a Yellowstone touring stage.
It's actually one of the very first pieces that was gotten for the museum. Dora McGrath, who was our founder and the first woman senator of Wyoming, she wrote letters and asked if she could have a Yellowstone stagecoach. So this is an original one because before 1915, automobiles were not allowed in the state park. And that's why the Yellowstone Highway through the canyon was even built, was to bring automobiles to the Yellowstone State Park.
Oh, really? National
Just
Park.
a little side, yep, the national park. Just a little side note. The other vehicle you'll look at is a great buggy, and the story attached to that is fascinating because it was Jay Torrey who sent Butch Cassidy to jail for supposedly stealing his horses.
Okay.
And he was enemies of Butch Cassidy because Butch Cassidy was one of his cowboys. He liked him, but then they had a falling out. And that's when Butch Cassidy really started going into the outlaws. He was an outlaw when he showed up here, but he kept trying to go on the straight and narrow, so he says.
Right. Then you've got some women's winter attire, it looks like.
Yeah. And then,
very, very nice display.
And we also have plenty of what they have done in the past is taken real artifacts from around our area, because we don't have props in our museum. We have artifacts from the area that are used in the displays. So we have a parlor, we have a kitchen, downstairs we have a boardwalk that has a lot of the old stores with original things from Thermopolis.
And a doll case here with a bunch of porcelain dolls and a Santa Claus and
Yeah.
an old teddy bear.
Yes.
And then you've got your bedroom. And then here you've got a foot warmer that's made out of ceramic, clay, and a nice little bassinet and a dry sink. And
So what you're pointing out is all of the details, because we'll have people show up and they think they can breeze through this place in an hour.
oh,
And after 2 hours, they're like, we have to go, but we'll be back.
I've spent weeks in this museum, but it was for a different reason. I was putting all the flooring down, but I got to spend weeks in here looking at things. So I've done it twice.
And you just look at the details and you look at everything they have. I mean, I went down a rabbit hole with this hip bath because I was like, what in the world is a hip bath? And then you find out that it was imported from England. And it's like, what rancher, what homesteader would spend the money to bring that? Because you had to have everything brought in from stagecoach until about 1907 when Kirby got the railroad.
Okay. Yeah, and the hip bath that she's talking about is one that you just kind of sit in, and about all it really gets is your hips and private area, I guess, clean, but you can throw water everywhere else if you want. And then you've got the old safe out of the
This
Tom
is
Skinner.
Tom Skinner's safe. And what is interesting about Tom Skinner is we found Millward Simpson's dad, and Millward Simpson was one of our governors, and his son is Al Simpson.
The senator.
So
Right.
Senator Al Simpson's grandfather actually wrote a letter and said that Tom Skinner, and to back up, Bill or William Simpson was a lawyer in the area, and he knew the hole-in-the-wall game personally.
Okay.
He prosecuted them and defended them, both of them. So he knew Tom Skinner and said that Tom Skinner kept, after the Wilcox train robbery, had burnt banknotes in his safe.
Okay.
Tom Skinner was a poor cowboy that came up the Chisholm Trail, and within only a few years was able to go back home, and his family remembers him wearing gold coins as buttons on
Oh,
his suit.
wow.
He built and bought this beautiful cherry wood bar all the way from Ireland, and he was able to afford to buy this brand new safe in 1915. It's like, where did Tom Skinner, a poor cowboy on the Chisholm Trail, get all his money?
Where did he?
But
From
he
selling liquor to the cowboys?
and when did the hole in the wall bar shut down in Thermopolis?
Oh, there's been debate about that. It was
Early
I don't know.
70s,
Yeah,
wasn't it?
It was definitely in the 70s, because I believe that this then went to another place before the Pioneer Association was able to buy it and bring it to the museum.
Okay, and when she's talking about this cherry wood bar, we're looking at a bar that's probably 18 to 20 feet long, very ornate, very beautiful. And the thing that's really cool is you guys have your hole in the wall celebration sometime during the summer where you actually serve drinks
Yes.
at the bar. When is that?
It'll be June 20th through the 23rd, I believe.
Okay.
It'll start on a Thursday and go through Sunday.
Is that the Gift of the Waters pageant?
No,
that's in
that's
August,
in
right?
August.
Okay.
This is during PRCA rodeo.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And so what happens, and it's funny to say, it's almost magical, because you're standing at the bar, and remember, they didn't have seats. You actually placed your foot up on this brass
Rail
rung here, and when you're standing there and a bartender pushes across, and we also sell sarsaparilla,
Okay.
so you can have your choice of beer, wine, Wyoming whiskey, or sarsaparilla, and you get it across the bar, and you stand here and you drink it. It's just, you're transported back in time. You're reenacting something that had happened countless times before. And this is the bar that Redford tried to buy, by the way.
Oh, is
And
it?
we wouldn't let him buy it.
And this is the same bar that Butch Cassidy and several others
Yes.
did drink at. This is actually served the outlaws.
Yes.
Yes. It is so cool.
And they helped pay for it.
And the cash registers, they came out of...
One of them, this actually did come out of the Tom Skinner bar. This came out of the American Legion.
okay.
We had a strong American Legion back in the day.
Well, this is just a beautiful bar here. Then you've got the little stagecoach room.
This is actually the Nick Eggenhofer display. The family loaned us his artwork. He was a famous Western Story magazine illustrator. Thousands of illustrations, and he's actually from the Cody area,
Okay.
but he is a Wyoming icon.
Cool.
Even this picture, when you look at it, you're like, why is a Greek goddess being displayed here in a outlaw museum? And then you go over to the placard and you realize that this was a girl that posed for this picture dressed up like a Grecian and with the cherry blossoms, and she was just a homesteader's daughter here in Wyoming.
Wow.
And this, I believe, if you look at it, that this painting, I'm hoping it would say when it was, so it had to have been before 1912, because that was when she died in Thermopolis. So in the 1800s.
Is it
No,
Esther at the Well? Is that what it's called?
Yes.
Yeah, it's right here.
And you can read about it on this side.
And
And
it
that's
seems
why
to-
people need to come visit, to see it for themselves.
No, the reason people need to come visit is because they need to get out of their houses and do something. I'm
That's
sorry. No, you used to have a little desk that I think belonged to Cattle Kate.
I was just about.
I was going to say,
there.
it used to sit over here.
No, they moved it over here, and so that's one of the things that I find fascinating is how did we get Cattle Kate's cabinet? And Cattle Kate, as you know, was one of the people that was hung during the Johnson County Wars.
She was one of the first.
She
Yes.
was one of the first that the Cattlemen Association went against because they wanted her property,
Right.
and they tried to spread lies about her, that she was all these things that now that as we seek in the records, we realize it wasn't true. She was secretly married, but she couldn't be married in order to, if she married, she would lose her property.
Right.
But she was married to the neighboring rancher, and the two of them worked together, and the two of them died together. They were both lynched.
Right. At the very beginning of the Johnson County Wars.
So if you go down the ramp, you'll see just sort of a diorama of what it would have looked like at a coal mine outside of it.
And there's lots of stuffed animals in here. You got a porcupine and some ducks and a skunk and a bobcat,
Yeah.
pheasant. Just
And
it's kind of a wildlife display, I guess you could say. Oh, the bobcat's eyes light up red when you push the ringer bell.
Yes, he used to be in the Thermopolis High School.
Oh, because they're the bobcats.
Yes, and he actually was a pet bobcat that the guy went and tried to put back in the wild, and the cat kept returning and attacked him, so he finally had to shoot his poor little cat. But they're not ones that you need to keep as pets. This is one of the few replicas that we have in the museum that's not actually an artifact, and it's a replica of a sheep eater's lodge, just a wiki-up, and it just kind of gives kids and adults an example of what our sheep eaters, which was a branch of the Shoshone tribe, lived.
And you've got the skull that may have been the last wild buffalo killed in this area at Paint Rock Creek near Hyattville. Wow.
Yes, it was really interesting is because we were looking at what caused the demise of the buffalo in our area, and it was the blizzards that killed the cows. Remember all those horrible die-ups, as they call them, and it was the brucellosis, the diseases that came up the Chisholm Trail. For a while there, they actually started banning Texas cattle because the Texas cattle were bringing in ticks and other things that were killing the cows that were here, and it also affected the buffalo. So the buffalo, at least in Hot Springs County and in our area of Wyoming, were not killed off by hunters. There was no way when you look at the numbers, thousands that were in our area, and it just happened within 10 and 20 years because in 1870, George Frizen talked about seeing 4,000 buffalo up at No Water.
Really?
Out of Thermopolis.
Wow.
So here's our Jibo display.
Nice.
And what you see here is you see a replica of the Jibo door, but you'll also see the miners' hats, the equipment that they use.
The carbide lamps.
Yes. And this is
and drills and a forge.
And you have a small replica that someone put together of the mine itself, just to show
They
the
had
depth
rail
that they
cars
went.
in there.
Yes, because we had a spur that came from Kirby.
Okay. Then you've got an old glass battery that's melted down, and I don't know if I want to see how that worked.
And this is our geology section, so we have rocks that are featured from around Wyoming.
Back to this over here.
Oh, you saw something caught his eye.
Well, no, you said that the rail was in Kirby. Did they bring the coal all the way from Jibo to Kirby
Yes,
on that conveyor belt?
That's why, so how it was set up and how it was described to me is if you go out there, you'll see the tipple. And we had a miner explain how the railroad spur came down and then it would turn around and then it would bring the coal back and they would fill it right directly from the, you see how close it was to the mine entrance.
Okay, and then they railed it off of that spur across,
Yes.
because the distance between Jibo
3
and
miles.
Kirby, is that all it is 3
Yeah.
miles? I was thinking it was more like 5 or 6, but
I believe it was 3 miles
okay.
is what they said.
Well, that sounds reasonable. And
And
it
it
would
was
have been
a
about
new
the same
rail.
distance to Crosby.
Yes.
Yeah.
Again, I just started studying about Crosby, so.
Well, and I don't know much about it either, other than I've seen it on the maps, and one time I pulled off the highway there and walked around and just kind of looked, and there was still a couple of sidewalks, but
Yes, same thing in Jibo. Now, my favorite thing in the geology section, believe it or not, is this. It is a Geiger counter, because we had uranium that there was a big bust about it, and people, instead of just doing rock hunting, they would go look for uranium, and they would have their Geiger counters out as they looked for this.
and that was right here in Thermopolis?
Yes.
Really?
Yep, they were out looking for it everywhere.
Wow.
Yes.
Another little interesting thing about Thermopolis that I was going to bring up there was Thermopolis's town site used to be what, about 5 miles north of here, 7 miles
9 miles, yes.
north of here.
Old Thermopolis.
And they ended up moving the town to the hot springs, or right close to the hot springs, just after the gift of the waters, I'm sure.
Yes, so what had happened is that Old Thermopolis, originally its name was going to be Hansonville, by the way.
Okay.
Because the cowboy that founded it, his name was Ben Hansen. So there was, you had Hansonville, or Old Thermopolis, and across the river you had Andersonville, which also would be called, what was the other name for it? Big Horn City.
Okay.
But you had these, or sometimes they call them hot springs. But Thermopolis was the one where most of the businesses were going. Andersonville was where the saloons and other things were going.
Okay.
So you can see the difference between the two towns. So when the purchase happened of Thermopolis, a fast rider was sent to Lander to immediately put in for the town site, because their fear was that a homesteader would take the area by the stream, by the hot springs, and they wanted to build Thermopolis right on the hot springs, because Thermopolis, in 1890, they wanted it to be a tourist town.
Okay. Now back to the paleontology and
Oh,
the
so we're
geology
in the
department. I'm
geology.
sorry, it's just that things cross my mind at certain
Yes,
times.
so
And
we
I
do
was
have-
trying to bring that up like 6 or 7 times and wasn't able to get it there because I'd lose track of when we started talking about something else. But okay, so
So we do have examples of dinosaur bones. Like you said, we have the Wyoming Dinosaur Center. And what dinosaurs were actually not discovered in Wyoming, in Thermopolis, until the 1996.
what?
Eddie Cole came in and he looked at the formation and he said, there's dinosaurs in those hills. And so he was working with an investor who is Burkhart, and purchased the Wyoming Dinosaur Center and has built that up. And he was working with him, and within, I believe, I forget how much, 6 months, 3 months, he discovered 54 dinosaurs.
Yeah, when they were building the road into where they were going to do their dig, from what I remember.
Could very well be.
They-
And Eddie Cole is still in town. You can visit him at Ava's Silver and Rock Shop.
Oh,
Just at
okay.
the corner by McDonald's.
By McDonald's, yeah.
Yes, I recommend going and spending time with him. He's just got so much information about rocks, but he makes them come alive.
Okay.
Suddenly you can envision what the world was like when these dinosaurs walked around. Another favorite rock, before we leave the geology, is just this large crystal geode, because it has a story attached to it.
And what's the story?
We had, this is what's so funny about this, Sadie Nicholson and her friends, all older ladies, discovered it, and somehow they said, we got it into our Jeep. I don't know. This is a very big geode. I've never seen this big of a geode in my life.
I know I walked in here and
Wow.
I go, wow.
And it was the old ladies that went and got it. I think they said Hannah Perkins, Lillian McQueen, and Sadie Nicholson. They were all rock hounds. When they passed away, their family talked about they did not have gardens, they had rock.
Oh, wow. And there is a lot of interesting rocks and geology
There really
in this
is.
area.
Now, we talked about Andersonville, and this is an actual cabin from Andersonville that they disassembled and brought back and put together
Right.
here in the basement of the museum.
And
And
you've
this
got,
is one of our haunted areas, just to give you an idea.
oh, okay.
So we step back. But
And
this
you've got
is
the
another-
you got the whole cabin set up. It was
Yes.
basically just a 1-room cabin with a wood cook stove in it and a table, a few chairs, 2 beds. You got it looks like a full size and a twin, and some nice little cabinets, a couple of guns hanging from the beam that comes across the house to help hold the roof up. Buffalo coats, bear skull hanging on the wall, fox rug. Nice little kitchen. I think I could live in that.
And, we only got a tip of the iceberg on this museum. What you'd find here in the basement is we have everything from rocks donated in memory of and from some of our pioneers. And what we count as our founders is among them Chief Washakie and outlaws like Tom Skinner. And when you tour this, you can feel the history, because I can't stress enough that what we actually have in our museum are real artifacts.
Right.
I mean, I pointed out the very few replicas that we have here, and the rest of it is real. We even have on our gel display, there's a badge, and that badge is not a pretend badge. It's actually from a sheriff from Jibo.
Oh, really?
If you look around the corner at our doctor's office, all of these instruments and everything's from the Hopewell Hospital that used to be on Hospital Hill as you come into Thermopolis.
And as you come into Thermopolis, it's well known that you're going to lose cell reception on Hospital Hill, but you can overlook off to the east. You can see the hot springs and everything else, but there used to be a hospital there.
Yeah.
And if you go into Hot Springs State Park, park at the walkways that go around the hot springs
The Rainbow
deposits,
Terraces.
Rainbow
Yeah.
Terraces. They have a swinging bridge. Don't miss the swinging bridge. It
No.
is too much fun. It goes across the Bighorn River. And on the other side of where that bridge is where the old hospital used to be, from what I understand.
You got it. And here's the artifacts from it. So we have preserved some of their story. Behind you, you got a telegraph when they shut down and no longer had to do the telephone, where
Right.
I think of that actress. She's putting it in. Hello. And we have a small display for Tim McCoy, who was one of the top 4 Western actors in the world.
And now he was from Thermopolis?
Yes.
Okay.
He came here as a young cowboy in 1910, inspired by all the stories he had read in his little comic book.
Then you've got a small military display with
Yeah.
a spotting scope and a M1 Grand and some trophies for shooting, it looks like.
Yes, it's a traveling display. And then we have an actual still
Ooh.
that was donated. And then you have things from the kitchen that were commonplace, but we look at it and we're like, what is that?
Yeah, definitely. There's the Scotch tape dispenser that's really pretty cool in here. And okay, let's talk about this building real quick. I know that at one point in time it was a Ford dealership, right?
Yes, and the Coca-Cola bottling
That's the
company.
one I want to go to.
Yes.
Because I was doing a job at somebody's house and they had a couple of old bottles and they said bottled in Thermopolis, Wyoming.
Yep, right here.
Now we've got a big Pepsi bottling company north of us in Worland, which is 35 miles north or something like that. And they put out a lot of the bottled water comes from a spring up out of Hyattville, or not a spring, a deep well.
It's the
And
aquifer.
The aquifer.
Yep, it's the same
but-
aquifer that Wyoming whiskey uses.
Okay. But they bottle the water there. They also bottle all of their, or can all of their soda pops from Worland. But I was really surprised to find out that you had a Coca-Cola and a 7-Up.
Yeah.
Because it was on a 7-Up bottle that I
Yes.
saw and that was right here in this building.
Right here?
Right here.
Yes. Yeah, if you listen closely, you can hear the people working and just bottling it up and freighting it out. And so we're in the military section now. We tried to keep the history to our local people. So we had somebody represented in every war, from Korea, even in the Spanish-American War. We had people that, Torrey's Rough Riders, if you remember that buggy upstairs in that
Okay.
picture. Jay Torrey was on his way to the Spanish-American War. He was late and missed it.
Uh-oh.
But they get a count that they were on their way.
And you've got uniforms and
Yeah.
firearms and pictures, holsters,
even
some
have-
entertainment items like the Viewmaster over here.
Yep. And we even have a menu from General Sheridan.
Oh, really?
Yep. From Lieutenant General Sheridan, he did a party. And in 1877, they came through this area, and his journal, that's where I got the story of the 4,000 buffalo in no water,
Okay.
is from the journal that we have from 1877.
Wow.
And then this is the boardwalk, as we call it, and you get to see what the newspaper office. There used to be 2 newspapers. It was the Thermopolis Record and the Thermopolis Independent. Now they've melded into one. You see their actual die cast that they do. This is one of the things I think is fascinating, is that we have how they did the engraving. And
Okay.
It's the Thermopolis Hot Springs, Wyoming. It's a picture, and then you can see what it looked like in the
Wow.
newspaper.
Now, was that made out of wood or lead or?
I'm not even sure. It
Okay.
looks like it was made out of wood block with lead.
And it's
stamp.
got a picture of a guy riding a bronchi horse, and it says Thermopolis in Hot Springs County, Wyoming. It's a book cover, and the press is the size of a book cover that you could put ink on and stamp the cover.
On the other side from the press office, we have our jail. And this is where I was saying the badge is an actual artifact. Everything on the desk is actually from here, including the books that you see and the
Oh, wow.
ledgers. We have ledgers from that time. And this is our bank with the actual bank door and the bank setup here with the bags and checkbooks. And there's our teller.
And Butch Cassidy's not in there.
He was in the bank earlier.
Was he?
Yes, he made a withdrawal.
With a draw? You've got a shoe shop over here?
Yes, and again, you look at these and you're like, oh, there's a boot. Well, those are coal miner boots
Okay.
from an actual coal miner that John Burry that worked in the coal mines.
Wow.
His family donated the boots. You have our hot springs, our dedication to a hot springs state park. This is what do you think this is, this trough?
That was probably one of the original hot springs bathtubs.
That's what I assumed, but it's a buffalo trough.
A buffalo,
It was to
oh.
give the buffalo water.
Oh, from
Hand carved out of the local stone.
okay, so
And you would never guess.
so this would have been up in the buffalo pasture.
Yes.
Now Thermopolis still has a buffalo pasture just beyond the state park or as part of the state park.
Since
and-
1917.
Okay, and they've got several buffalo that you can drive through that area and see the buffalo basically in their original habitat.
Yeah.
And it's always kind of fun to go up and look at that. Also, the hike up to the top of the world's largest mineral hot springs
Monument Hill.
monument is pretty cool too.
The story of Monument Hill is that when somebody was healed from the hot springs, because that's what we were, was about healing waters, they would take a rock with them and they would hike up to Monument Hill and place it.
Okay,
And that was the monument, was a monument to their healing.
that's cool.
This is our barber shop. Again, everything from the area. Here's our dentist office. I brought a dentist in here, and this is where he was fascinated because he said a lot of these tools they still use. I said, I didn't need to hear that. The studio, again, we're in the boardwalk. You're getting a kind of a glimpse of what it used to look like. One day I was standing here at the general store, and I happened to look over at the list, and I was like, all of these things that are on display were from actual stores in Thermopolis.
Really?
Including the Golden Rule. And I mean, you look at this, the Wyoming Dental Association made donations, and you realize the amount of people that donated to this museum is what makes it so great.
Yeah.
In fact, you look over here and you're like, oh, here is a dress shop. Oh, this looks nice. Then over in the corner, read whose dress it is.
Virginia Bridger Hahn.
The daughter of Jim Bridger, his daughter that
Oh.
was half Arapaho,
Okay.
half white.
Wow.
Her
And the
dress.
Bridger Trail comes right
Yeah.
through here too.
She came back to Wyoming to Thermopolis for her retirement. In her
Oh,
last
really?
days. And the town took care of her because she wasn't doing so well. So now we kind of made a loop. We're back into the area. You're going to find that too. Everything kind of winds around. But we would be remiss if we missed this section, which is with all of our branding irons and our saddles and a actual forge from a blacksmith shop.
And a wheel tire shrinker for wagons and ox yoke and a setup model with 16 mule team.
This is to celebrate 16 Mule Team Johnson. He was a freight trader and he worked for the McGraths, and it was because of him that Broadway is so wide.
Okay.
He told Martin McGrath, I need the street to be this wide so I can turn around my freight. And because he was hauling in 1890s and 1900, 20 to 40 to $50,000 worth of merchandise.
Whoa.
McGrath is like, you can get what you want, and he made sure that the roads were wide.
And they are
Because of
wide.
this. And this is why, so that he could turn around his team.
You've got anvils and a big, large bellows to keep the forge fire hot.
And of course,
Bits
what
and spurs.
museum is not complete without its own outhouse?
Well, yes, you got to have an outhouse. But I see that you chicken wired it off so that nobody uses it.
Yes, and if you look, it's actual original 1920 Sears and Roebuck's catalog used for toilet paper.
That's right.
Just like the old days.
Just like the old days. Wrinkle it up good first.
Yes. So as we come to the end of what you would find in the main hall, because remember too is when you come visit, you'll see the annex, which has an original 1920s schoolhouse, agricultural display, and we have the carriage house, which was for Emory Hotel. That's next door. But down here, what we have is our Native American display. We have all of these arrowheads were found from one family throughout Wyoming, and they donated it. And it's just
Wow, one family found all of these.
One family found all this, including the gun that you see in that display. Over here we have, which was at the mouth of the canyon, a dig site that George Frizen did, and it showed that the Native Americans, the ancient ones, were here for 10,000 years ago.
Now, wasn't he a major...
He was the first Wyoming state archaeologist.
Right.
And he did not go back to college, by the way, until he was in his 40s.
Really?
And so that part of his career spanned, and he just recently passed away in his 90s.
And this is all stuff that they've collected...
This was from one dig site.
From one dig
and it's
site.
layered to show you
Wow.
what was
And
found
there's
in that
bone tools in here. There's arrowheads. There's juniper bark. There's just all kinds of neat little things. Now, this display is really, really impressive. You can't even begin to describe how many arrowheads are in here, all in nice display cases.
And trading beads.
And in designs. They've got all the chippings and stuff in the design of a phoenix or some sort of a bird.
Thunderbird is what I would.
And there you go. And another one that's in the shape of an arrowhead, and just fantastically displayed in some really, really neat pieces.
And then this is an elk hide that is attributed to Chief Washakie. It was either Chief Washakie or his oldest son, Dick Washakie, that painted it, because it was in 1900 was when it was finished, and he died that next month. But it depicts a battle scene, and Chief Washakie was known for painting his actual exploits on hide, and we have one, a wonderful example.
And what were they using for color? Do you know?
At that time, it would have been manufactured dye.
Because it's just amazing that the color is, it looks faded, but the color is still very, very visible.
And then some of my favorite things here is the quill work that you'll find, like on this baby papoose.
Right.
And the quill work, as you know, is made from porcupine quills. And to belong to the Quill Society was a big honor. Not just anybody could actually do quill work.
Really?
It was very spiritual.
And there's a lot of beadwork also, but the quill, I've always been fascinated with the quill work. It's amazing that you can take a porcupine quill, flatten it out, and make it into a bead.
They'd soften it in their mouth as they...
Is that the way they did it?
So that...
Then you've got a nice moccasin display and dolls. Just this part of the museum, I had always, for some reason, skipped over. And I came through here and I was just flabbergasted, probably like 5 or 6 years ago.
I'm always finding fun things. Whenever I come through, I see something new each time.
And then you have your annex complex that has old farm machinery and, like you said, the old schoolhouse and all of that.
And the old schoolhouse, we have opened up to kids, 3rd and 4th graders, to come in and experience a 1920s classroom. We have actually.
Do they get fingers smacked if they're misbehaving and stuff?
She learns them, and she's an old school teacher that will do it. They get slates. They get. But their favorite part is they actually get characters, and they get to become somebody else for 3 hours.
Oh, that is awesome.
That we offer.
That is cool.
Yes, I'm excited about that. And I guess we could end with petroglyph that we have. Normally we leave them undisturbed out in the wild
Right.
in situ, but this one had collapsed and they rescued it. And so we pieced it back together and have it here on display.
Okay, and speaking of the petroglyphs, again, if you're in the
Legend
Thermopolis
Rock.
area, Legend Rock is a place to go. They've got a whole wall of them. It's probably 15, 20 miles north of here that you turn off and then go another 2 miles or 3
Yeah.
miles down the dirt road. But it's a really neat petroglyph site, along with Medicine Bow, which is up by Hyattville. Have you been to that one?
Yes. and they
That
have a
one's
new
fantastic.
exhibit.
Oh, do they?
Yes, I want to go up and see it. Brand new, just opened up this month.
Oh, wow. Okay, I guess I'm going to have to go up and see it too.
I think
I'm a little
so.
bit closer to it than what you are, but there's a lot to see and do in this area, and a lot of history. And I'm personally very jealous of you guys. We live 60 miles north in a town called Basin, and Basin was the original county seat for all of the counties in the Bighorn Basin. Washakie County, Hot Springs County, Park County, and Bighorn County were all part of that county. You guys have a museum that highlights this county, highlights this area, and we have just as much history north of here, and all of our history has been sold on eBay. We don't have a museum that's worth going to. We've got a small museum in Grable, but as far as a Bighorn County museum that documents the history of Basin, it doesn't exist.
We can thank all of ours for one person. Doran McGrath was a founding mother of Thermopolis. She came here when it was brand new and wanted to move here. In the 1910s, when people were still homesteading, still
Right.
building up, she started to collect artifacts. She had the vision for a museum. By 1920, she had formed the Pioneer Association, and it took her another 20 years in 1940 to open up the museum. But it was through her hard work and getting people excited. She had the ear of the governor. She was Wyoming's first senator, so she
Okay.
had those connections. She was writing letters to Chief Washakie and Chief Yellowcap. She was saying, please donate stuff to our museum, be a part of it. And this is a testimony to her, to what she did back in her site, what she said, we need to preserve our stories.
And
Without her, we would have nothing.
It is a beautiful museum. Like I said, it's one of my favorite county museums. And you guys keeping the legacy going is awesome to me. Before we close, plug your podcast again.
Pioneers of Outlaw Country. You'll find stories. I do a narrative style, and we just share. Sometimes it's 3-minute stories, sometimes it's 30 minutes, and we just share the stories that you won't hear usually. I have yet to do a story on Butch Cassidy, but I've done one on Watt the Watcher, Walt Putney, who was his lookout. So it's a really fun podcast, and I would love to, for you guys to listen.
And it's very well done. It is a good podcast. And as long as we're talking about podcasts, I'd like to recommend another one. There's a historian in Washakie County in Worland by the name of Clay Gibbons, and he has a podcast called Sweet Smell of Sagebrush. And if you want to hear real stories about Wyoming, the way it was founded, the way people lived 100 years ago, 150 years ago, and you're interested in the actual history, listen to those two podcasts. It'll give you a very good idea of how people lived and what happened, because you can't make this stuff up. I mean, if you were sitting around telling these stories around a campfire, people might think that you're making up stories, but the truth is better than the non-truth in a lot of these stories.
It is. That is one of my favorite stories is downtown Thermopolis. And so I recommend, if you're going to listen to Pioneers of Outlaw Country, to listen to Tom O'Day and the Flying Saucer. It's about the shootout downtown in 1903.
Okay, no, I have not heard that one. I thought I listened to, I got on some site, and they had them all listed.
It's
and I thought
there.
that
I'll show it to
I'm
you.
going to have to look for it afterwards.
Tom O'Day and the Flying Saucer, and it says just a shootout. It's 12 minutes long, but it is true. It made the headlines on all the Wyoming papers, and people celebrated Tom O'Day.
Wow, that is so cool. And you guys are open all winter long?
Yes, normally the hours are 9 to 5.
9 to 5, okay.
Yeah.
And it's well worth your stop. There's so much here to see. We've scratched the surface of some of the items. This place is full of history and full of neat artifacts, and it's done in such a way that you actually feel part of the museum. Because the displays are out and open, and I mean, you've got a lot of stuff behind glass too, but you can get up and actually see things the way it's presented. So thank you very much for your time today, Jackie.
Well, thank you for stopping by.
And I always finish out my podcast by saying the world is full of wonder. People need to get out and explore. Check out these little museums and places that maybe a lot of people don't go. And everybody have a wonder-filled day.
Haul the roll and go. Where am I to go? Meet Johnny, where am I to go? For I'm a young and a sailor lad, and where am I to go?